Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominick and Brian.
Today is a special podcast, but it's equally scary for me because for the first time in my life, in a public setting, in a recorded format, I will be sharing the very candid details of the 4 years that I spent in Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery between the years of 2013 and 2017. And the reason why this is so scary for me is because 100% of my lifeblood comes from the work that I do as a keynote speaker, as a corporate trainer, as an executive coach to super high performing people in the highly conservative arenas of financial services, in banking and pharmaceutical companies and others, hedge funds. And sex addiction carries with it a stigma. People don't understand what it is. Some people don't even think it's a thing. And I worry that by sharing this, I become too controversial, untouchable, unhireable. And then all of a sudden, my entire business evaporates overnight. And yet at the same point in time, the only reason why, or the primary reason why that I'm as effective as I am as a coach and as a speaker and as an author and as a trainer is because I've gone through the hardships. I've been humbled and humiliated. I've learned about myself. I've exposed my blind spots. I have confronted the most uncomfortable circumstances and situations in my life. And that allows me to see the struggle in others and to meet them with compassion and to provide them guidance to carry them through the other side of things that have been holding them back for most of their lives. And so while this is my story that's going to unfold over 2 separate podcasts, regardless of whether or not you've ever struggled or wondered about sex addiction, or if you ever had a problem or you have a behavior that you can't curtail, there's something in this for you. Because the central theme is that most of us learn about our own sexuality in complete isolation from others and never really talk about it. That is the central theme of my journey, how very small micro interactions that happen over hours and days and weeks and decades of a lifetime can lead someone like me, who, as you'll hear Brian refers to as a quote unquote normal guy, so far astray from the type of man that I wanted myself to be, and so far from the type of man that the rest of the world saw me to be. So here you have it, me opening the kimono for the first time in a public way, part 1 of my journey through Sex Addicts Anonymous.
Dominick, we just got done with a little exercise.
We did.
And I am geared up for this conversation. We are talking about Sex Addicts Anonymous. And I was shocked, Dominick, when you told me that you went through Sex Addicts Anonymous. Yeah. My first reaction was, what?
Is that thing real?
Is that real?
Yeah.
And really, you?
Yeah.
Like, you sat down in circles and talked to other guys about what you're doing sexually. Like, that seemed very strange for me, knowing that you're a powerful guy, knowing that you're a normal guy too. Yeah. I was shocked by it, so I'm excited about getting into this conversation. I'm going to take a little bit different role today. I'm going to be asking Dominick a lot of questions because I am genuinely curious to hear some of these answers.
Yeah.
So with that, Dominick, I honor you for even approaching the subject.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, same here, man. You know, one of the primary reactions I get from people when I tell them that I spent 4 years in Sex Addicts Anonymous from 2013 to 2017 is sex addiction a real thing? I don't know what most people conjure up the images in their minds when they think about a sex addict. Do they think of like Tiger Woods or Usher, 2 people who have, been self-proclaimed sex addicts? And a lot of men are like, hey, I would love to have those problems, like too much sex.
And that's exactly what popped into my mind when you said that.
Right.
I was like, oh, isn't that thing that guys go to when they get caught cheating and they want to save their marriage or save their relationship? Like, isn't that what it is? Isn't it kind of a no offense, but a bullshitty kind of excuse.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially and the reason why I think a lot of people take that as a bullshitty excuse is if it's an addiction, quote unquote, then you don't have to take responsibility for your actions. And I can totally understand that sentiment because there's usually a lot of destruction that's in the wake of that. So there's not a lot of compassion or sympathy when you hear about sex addiction. And then maybe one of the other prevailing things you may think of when you hear about sex addiction is like some unsavory, pervy guy in like a trench coat exposing himself to
yes.
people, to women, or to being on a playground near kids. And so like this sex addiction thing is really nebulous for a lot of people. And what I will say is we're going to have a pretty expansive conversation today. We're going to keep it lighthearted, and at the same point in time, the consequences of sex addiction are real. Like there are real people with real emotions and real feelings who have been on the receiving end, who've been on the brunt end of the destructive effects of sex addiction. And so real lives and real feelings are at stake here. And so we're going to keep that in mind as we talk about all of this because it can be a really triggering topic for a lot of people. My intentions are to help to educate people what sex addiction is and how broad of a category it is, to provide some perspective for people who are saying, like, why should I care about this? Is it a real thing? How do I handle this stuff? And then where am I on the spectrum, maybe?
That was big for me, Don. When you told me this, the first reaction I already mentioned about, is that real? The second reaction or feeling I had was, I've never really thought about me potentially being a sex addict. I don't feel like that at all. But how close am I?
Right. Yeah.
What is that? What is the line between just normal guy, sexy stuff and actually having an addiction?
It's a great question because a lot of what I share about my own personal behaviors, people are like, oh my God, that's me too. And I will share with you later on in our conversation one really distinct difference between something that's an addiction and something that's other than that. And I think that will provide a lot of perspective for anyone who's questioning, where's that dividing line?
I hope mine's no. Anna, whatever that question is, you're going to tell us. Whatever that element is, I really hope mine's no.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, I know you well enough, yours is no.
Okay, great. Okay. Now we can move forward with this podcast with ease and comfort.
Yeah.
When I think about Sex Addicts Anonymous, I think about a guy walking in the door with a circle of men, probably somebody leading it, and saying something like, hello, I'm Dominick, and I'm a sex addict. But I want to know how you got there.
Yeah.
Like starting off, maybe it's when you're younger, maybe I don't really know. What was the original seedings, potentially, of getting to that point?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. And I think to provide some context around that, it's probably helpful to start with, who am I today? I'm a 39-year-old man. I run my own business, right? So I'm a speaker, I'm an author. I help a lot of high-performing men and women in their corporate space, the entrepreneurial space, perform to a higher level. I spent 15 years in financial services working for Fortune 100 companies, ran a sales organization, had $1 billion sales goal, corner office in New York City overlooking where the ball drops on New Year's. And I share all of this because you use this one word in the opening, Brian, that is really poignant, which is normal. I was kind of like this poster child of normalcy. And I grew up in a household where, if I were to look back on, for most of my life, when I looked back on my upbringing in my childhood, I would have told you I had the perfect upbringing, like a Norman Rockwell type of painting and caricature, like that any child would have desired to have. And by the way, I still feel that way. But I realized through having to unpack my journey of how I got to Sex Addicts Anonymous rooms where I did say, hi, I'm Dominick, I'm a sex addict. That is 100% real. It was the most surreal experience the first time I ever did it. But when I look back on my childhood, I realized that it wasn't quite the idealized version that I made it out to be. No one's is. And so for anyone who ever tells me they're like, hey, my childhood was perfect, my antenna goes up. It's like, oh, great. What are you ignoring or, overlooking? Right. And what have you idealized?
And talking with parents is not if you're going to mess up your kids.
Yeah. It's to the extent which.
To the extent and how.
Yeah, and how is your method of.
When parents accept that, well, then we're good. So this is not a knock on parents. This is your story, how it came up for you.
And the reason why I share about me today is because there are a lot of quote unquote normal people that are in the rooms of Sex Addicts Anonymous. And how people get there, there's a wide ranging, very varying number of paths on how to get there. And so I'll share mine. I've told you this story a million times, Brian, but like 30 something years ago, I discovered something that forever changed the trajectory of my life. I was in my basement in my family's house, rummaging around boxes. Don't even know what I was looking for, but that's where all the bodies are buried, in basements and in attics. And so I found this one box. It was like covered with dust. It was underneath like the staircase to come down in the basement. And I pulled it open and I hit pay dirt. And for any man that's like our age, so you're 37, I'm 39, like you kind of know where this is going. I discovered a Playboy magazine.
Oh, old school 2D porn.
Analog porn.
Great.
This is like this
epic moment of a childhood.
Epic moment, right?
Yes.
Every 8-year-old boy that I knew about Playboy at the time, but it was like on those racks at the magazine store that were like too high for us to reach. And like you could never get alone with one. And this time I had this thing not only in my hands, but like complete privacy. I don't know where my parents were. They're probably upstairs or something like that. And my heart was beating as I pulled open the paper, pulled open the magazine cover. That glorious centerfold falls out. And like songs are sung about this moment, right? Like that song, it's for a reason because it was that amazing. I remember like my body was feeling things that I'd never felt before. It was just like this surge of emotions. It was almost like eating as much candy as I possibly could in one moment. It was just, everything was pumping. My whole life changed because I saw a naked woman for the first time. I saw a body in a woman's gloriousness and I just became hooked on that. And moments later, I also knew that what was happening, like the presence of the moment kicked in. I realized, holy cow, like I could get in trouble for this. If I get caught, this would be bad.
When you're a kid looking at that, you're not thinking, why is this here? Who put it here?
No.
It's just, I better not get caught.
I better not get caught. Like, this is amazing. I want to stare at it as long as I physically can.
I'm going to put it back in the exact same position it is.
Yeah.
Get rid of all of the dust so it looks like there was never any dust there.
Yeah, like a real cleanup job.
And I'll be back later today.
Exactly. Yeah. Like 12 times today. Yeah. Because in my household, and here, like just to set the context, how sex was discussed in my home, it wasn't. One of the things that you and I talk about, Brian, is I'm a big believer that there are three forces that shape our sexuality at a very early age. I call them the 3 F's: your family, your faith, and your friends. And my family is like extraordinary. My mom and my dad, I couldn't have more love for them, and they raised me with the utmost care and love and attention. And because they were raised in an environment that you didn't talk about sex either, it became very uncomfortable for them. So sex was taboo in my household. An example of that, maybe some of you can relate to this, on movie night, it was simultaneously like one of the most exciting but also scary moments, because if there was a movie where there was a sexually suggestive scene and a woman's top came off, the collective sphincter of the room would tighten and my parents would like lunge across the couch and try to cover my eyes and be like, don't look at this. And then, my dad would have to fast forward the scene. And then it would just be like this like cloud of tension in the room for the next 10 minutes. And that made me feel awful. Like I hated those moments.
Awful. I know the exact moment you're talking about. I felt so proud that I would cover my own eyes and would say, look how good I'm doing, not looking at that bad stuff.
Right. And yet you're like, I'm going to wait till my parents go to sleep and then like rewind the tape and watch
100%.
From a very early age, I had these conflicting feelings. My family dynamic, my faith dynamic was I was Catholic. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten to 6th grade. Went to church every Sunday like a good little boy, good family. I was an altar boy. I did youth group. Premarital sex in the Catholic faith is sinful. It's wrong, maybe even damnation to hell. And for me, certainly looking at Playboy was a sin that I had to say the rosary
and it's not just even just sex at that point. It's anything related to sex is punishable by XYZ.
Bad.
Right.
I had no idea as a kid that this was like a natural feeling, a natural desire. Like the sexual energy is potent. The reason why we all exist here is because we have sexual energy. But at that age, it was just, this is bad. So the seeds were sown for like this little private world, and then the public world, which was Dominick, the really good boy, the well-behaved kid that got a lot of appreciation from adults who said I was good, from teachers who said I was well-behaved, getting great grades, etc. So that's like the very early stages. Probably doesn't sound too different in terms of like Maybe not like different, but it doesn't sound like that's the path of an addiction.
Right. I'm going to check in several times during this podcast. This is a great time to check in. So at this point, not a sex addict. It seems very normal.
Age 8, not a sex addict.
Right.
No.
Not a lot of 8-year-olds going to Sex Addicts Anonymous. So at this point, I feel as though the story is pretty normal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the fast forward to the next pivotal moment for me was like the first time in my life I think my parents ever slipped up in their supervision of me. So this was maybe like when I was 13 or 14. I came home from school and I realized that like fortune was smiling down upon me because my parents had left me home alone with a rated R movie.
Perfect.
And it was the epic classic White Men Can't Jump. Wesley Snipes, Woody Harrelson, and God bless her, Rosie Perez.
Love Rosie Perez.
I love Rosie. And Rosie has no idea the pivotal role that she played in my life, so I'll reveal that in a second. I popped the VHS tape in the VCR player. I sit down on the couch. I'm wearing like blue sweatpants, and I've got this like silver Sony remote control that I hit play. And there's a scene like in the movie where I think Woody Harrelson comes home, whatever, Rosie jumps on him, and they start like making out, and then her top comes off, and now I've got a boner. Because that's, I got a boner, like 13 years old.
Pretty natural thing.
That natural thing happens. I've had those before, right? Like, so I knew that was happening, but this time I did something with it. Like I started using this Sony remote control to rub the boner like through my blue sweatpants. And I would rewind the tape, press play, rewind the tape, press play. I just kept rewinding and playing.
With your hand. Not with your boner.
Yes, right,
okay.
right.
This is a very unique way to masturbate.
Yeah. This is my unique process, which I've patented. And this is happening over and over and over again. And all of a sudden, there's this like point of no return where all of a sudden, this surge of energy kind of from all parts of my body all of a sudden flows through this one concentrated section around my penis. And it's just like with the thunder and force of a New York City fire truck barreling down 14th Street. And then it's like, boom, 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 boom. Like I black out. I see like the supernova of stars. And like when I come to, the movie's still playing and I've got this wet spot in like the right side of my blue sweatpants, like the size of a dinner plate. I was like, what just happened? It felt amazing, but then there was this like, what was that? What was that? What was that? Like, I want to know what that was. And I keep rubbing because like I want more of that, and it's not like I don't feel anything. Yeah, where to go? And it's not happening. And then my penis is going soft, and I'm like, and then the reality of the moment sets in. It's like, holy shit! Like if I get caught, I'm going to be in big trouble. How do I explain this? I don't even know what just happened to me. So, quickly do damage control, stop the video, run up into my room, throw my sweatpants like behind the bed or something like that to hide it until they dry, and run into the bathroom, which is where a lot of teenage boys end up spending a ton of their time.
Dom, I feel like there's an element that we bypass here.
Oh, yeah.
This is the speed with which we shut off porn or Rosie Perez after we come.
Yeah.
There's a correlation between shame and how fast the porn is turned off afterwards.
Yeah, you don't linger. It's kind of like this.
But to your point, you're younger. If you get caught at home with pants that are wet, with Rosie Perez paused, I assume.
Oh, yeah. No, it was just keep. It was just
keep going.
Yeah.
There's going to be some questions that are asked. You need to get rid of the evidence quickly.
Chris Rock does the greatest stand-up thing. He goes, men have their porn stashes like locked up like Fort Knox. It's, they got this like treasure trunk or whatever under the bed, under deep like supervision. But every man ends up getting discovered at some point. And like how he gets caught? And everyone's like, what? He goes, he leaves it in the VCR. This was back in the day when that was like how people consumed porn. Because after like, men get off, it's like your brain stops functioning and you just leave the tape in the VCR for like your partner to come home and discover it. So at that point in time, I still had the wherewithal to kind of be like, okay, rewind tape, put it back in the thing.
Covering tracks.
Covered my tracks. Knew how to do that at that point. But then I go to the bathroom and, as a teenager, my recovery time is like minutes. And I've got myself a boner. Boom, do it again. And this white stuff is now floating.
And this time, so you're in the bathroom by yourself. This time, there's no Rosie Perez. There's no material. It's just like, this is something new. I wanted to try it again.
Exactly. So I used my own, I just reimagined what had just happened. And this time when I orgasmed, I remember like into the bathtub, like now it was like floating in the bath. I'm like, what is this white stuff? I was fascinated by it. I didn't know what happened. I knew that it was wrong. By the way, like I discovered masturbation by accident. This is kind of like the next escalation. So what I came to find very quickly was like this feeling of bliss, which was almost like now I had access to sitting on this endless pile of heroin, like a drug that I could just pull on this crank between my legs, and it would provide this amazing feeling anytime I wanted. I then soon figured out it was really good for something else too, which was modulating my emotions.
At this time, you mentioned two words. One was shame, that you knew it was wrong. Let's put it that way.
I don't think I was shamed yet.
You knew it was wrong, but you had this feeling of bliss.
Yeah. Wrong and bliss, this conflicting things.
Right. Was there any element yet where maybe you felt weird or you felt...
Yes. I had no idea what was going on. On some level, there was like this knowing. It wasn't like something I could put my finger on, but just this feeling that what I was doing should be hidden. And then that was reinforced by the third F, my friends. Like I was now in public school. So I had gone to 7 years of Catholic school. I could be considered like the big fish in the small pond over there. Like I was the leader of the class. I could call the shots. I was getting the best grades. I was the best athlete. And I was dating the cutest girl over there. Then I go to public school, which is actually 10 times larger. It's not a class of 20 anymore. It's a class of 200. I was no longer the smartest kid, definitely not the best athlete. And then the first girl I asked out said no. The second girl I asked out said yes, and then dumped me a week later. Like I was an extremely, extremely sensitive kid. And the cool kids I overheard talking one day saying, oh, that kid over there, like he must masturbate. He's a dork. Like he's a loser. So in my school, it was interesting, but like masturbation was not cool. It was not a sign of like you being a grown-up or sexually advanced. It was like you're the pervert with hairy palms.
At this point in life, we've got your family that's covering your eyes during movies or just not saying anything about sex. So it wasn't that it was bad, just not saying anything. You've got faith telling you that it's wrong to even feel these feelings. And now we've got friends saying it's weird who probably had way bigger issues than you going forward. But okay, so now you're doing something, you're loving something, there's fear, there's bliss. Now what?
Yeah. So I then discovered that masturbation was epic for this one thing, which was modulating my emotions. So when I had switched schools, I lost my identity. I was a small fish, big pond, and all of my validation at an early age, for whatever reason, I'd conditioned to come from external sources. I had intrinsic value. These are not words that I had any grasp over as a kid.
I was going to say, you were the most advanced 8th grader I've ever heard in my life.
Yes. I had no friends because I would say words like intrinsic. If I got good grades, if adults thought that I was well-behaved, if priests and nuns told me I was a good Catholic, like these were the things, or if a girl would show me her approval, those were the things that told me I had value and worth. Anytime one of those things would be off, like I'd strike out to end a game, lose the game for my team, I felt like literally inside I was dying. I had these sharp pains inside of me that I had no idea how to deal with. And 13 years old, I didn't have anyone to talk to about this stuff. I didn't have meditation or like breath work or yoga. Or
I imagine at 13, you don't even know what's going on. It's just you're living life and you're feeling a certain way and that's it.
Exactly right. Like that's it. No sense of awareness of something larger, but I just like this pain, I wanted to go away. What I discovered that masturbation was excellent for was to just eliminate all those feelings. The fastest way to get rid of that pain, that anxiety, that frustration, that isolation was I'd yank on that crank and it would take me away.
I have 1,000 funny scenarios in my head right now where it's like you striking out and then going home to masturbate. But
that's what happened.
But very really, like that sounds dangerous because you are feeling all these things often throughout every single day. And if that's the one thing that makes it feel better, I'm starting to see something.
Yeah, it was the only tool I had at my disposal for modulating these emotions. And it wasn't like anything got resolved. It was just I got a chance to suppress or numb or avoid those feelings. And I was also conditioning myself that this sexual interaction that I was having with myself, it was not about like understanding what my body was going through. It was not about understanding the sexual force or power that was within me. It was about escapism.
I'm starting to see a cycle here too, Dom. It's feeling, then modulate it or get rid of it, obliterate it with masturbation, then feel some fear or anxiety around the act of masturbating, which causes another feeling, which makes you want to masturbate again. And I see this cycle starting to happen.
Exactly right. And here's how that escalated for me. So I was regularly masturbating to orgasm like 4 or 5 times a day. As a young kid with a penis that is not quite equipped to handle that kind of wear.
There's very few penises that are 4 to 5 a day. My penis is not 4 to 5 a day.
Yeah.
Nor has it ever been.
Most are not built, I suppose, that way, at least from an early age. And what ended up happening, man, like I literally ripped up my penis. And it got to a place where it was like scabbed and torn open. Like if you were running and then you fell over and scratched your knee across pavement. Like I had those kinds of scabs on my penis.
I remember playing baseball, sliding into second base, and having a raspberry on my knee for weeks.
This is worse.
Worse
because
than
like
that. Wow.
You have baseball pants on to kind of like, you know, at least cover some of that. This is like friction, skin on skin. Like there's no... I would literally be walking the hallways at school where like the scabs of my penis would be up against like my pants or my shorts or whatever. It would hurt. I'd be running, playing baseball after school. Like it would be painful, but it wouldn't stop me. I would still find that little piece of real estate on my penis that was unencumbered. And I would just like stimulate that because it was the thing that helped me to survive.
It was literally like the survival or the pleasure was higher more important than the pain associated with your bleeding dick.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
The pleasure was always great, but like what really started to take hold there was avoiding and getting rid of the pain.
The emotional pain.
The emotional pain. The physical pain, like, was fraction what was causing me anything.
Enter ad for sustained lubrication here.
That was the thing I didn't even know about. I didn't know that you could use lubrication as like Vaseline or like...
No, right.
Yeah,
right.
I didn't know that any of that stuff existed. But this is like one of the real big formative stages was when masturbation was being used as a tool to get rid of pain, emotional pain, to numb out. That is a telltale sign. And especially a lot of the men that I ended up seeing later on in my life in those Sex Addicts Anonymous rooms would do the same thing. Like we actually at one point, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit and I'll get back into the story, but we ended up thanking our addictions because it helped us to survive certain things in our lives. Some people use their addictions to survive like the physical abuse they were experiencing at home or the rape or the incest or the, you name it, like the violence. And the addiction allowed the pain to just go down enough so you could wake up the
tolerable.
Next day. Yeah. I carried a lot of guilt and shame around the fact that like my problems, when I look back on it as a kid, is like I switched schools and I lost my identity. Like that's white privilege problems. And so I carried some guilt and shame around that, even being in the rooms. When I say the rooms, I mean the Sex Addicts Anonymous rooms, because it was like my problems. And this guy sitting next to me was beaten and abused and sodomized by his father. And I'm in here. That was a big problem for me. But I like sharing that part of the story because I bet you there are other men who are listening to this or even women who are listening to this to say like, yeah, you know, I had quote unquote everything. I had the Norman Rockwell upbringing and I still am quote unquote fucked up and like carry guilt around that.
I'm thinking about my situation growing up and masturbating. In the moment, did you know that this is what you were doing? Did you know that you were regulating your emotions or was it just a natural thing?
Didn't think about it.
Right.
Just
did it.
Stimulus response. Like the stimulus was pain or whatever.
And it's upon reflection then looking back and saying, oh, wow, that's what I was doing.
Yeah. I just thought I really liked masturbation.
I'm going through my head right now as we're talking and looking at my history of masturbation and saying, was I doing it to numb out pain? Or was I doing it because it felt great and that was it?
Right.
I'm personally falling on the side of... Unless maybe I didn't need to do some hypnosis here, but get a little deeper. I remember it being more on the pleasure side. Maybe it's even a little naughty or I shouldn't be doing this. And that's exciting side.
Yeah.
I can't say that, not that there was never a time, but I can't remember a time, even upon reflection, where I was like trying to numb something out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that might be one of the indicators, not like a certainty, but like an indicator for maybe there was a healthier relationship for you around masturbation than there was for me.
So I'll check in at this point in your life. I should say at that point in your life, not a sex addict yet.
Here's a more useful question, Brian. Like, I appreciate you asking it that way. I don't think there's like a dividing line of like, did this moment create sex addiction or not? It's like this gradual process. And I think where it tips over is if there's like destructive behavior that you wish to stop, behavior that like you make this commitment to yourself to say, I want to curtail it or I want to stop it. And then you keep breaking promises to yourself and there's consequences to it. That is addictive behavior. That behavior 5 times a day, every day, while my dick was like broken to pieces, that is a compulsion. That is an addiction right there. So, I mean, I guess you could say that like at that point in time, yes. And if you had told me to stop, I wouldn't have been able to, you know?
There's no control in doing that.
Yeah, there's no control. And there was a severe amount of guilt and shame because if I were ever to have been confronted about that, like if someone were to have found me or if I'd been discovered, or even my friends were talking about it, was like, I would always deny that I masturbated. And so talk about those two worlds, like the public Dominick and the private Dominick. Now the divergence between the two was wider. The life that I was living behind the curtains and the life that I was living outside, like on the public stage, there was a bigger and bigger gap.
Sounds like you're living 2 different identities.
Completely.
Yeah.
So let's escalate it one step further.
Yeah, because I doubt you go from masturbating 5 times a day straight to SAA, Sex Addicts Anonymous.
No, right.
I imagine there's some more story here.
There was a few decades between those two things happening.
Okay.
And talk about like what was happening in my public sex life. I still believed that I would go to hell if I had sex. I remained a virgin until I was 20 years old. Primarily because like I believed that if I had sex before marriage that I would go to hell. So while I'm in this isolated stage of masturbating 5 times a day from the ages of 13 or 14 years old up to the age of 20 and beyond, like 6 or 7 years of masturbation, I did not even experience a sexual encounter with another girl until I was 18 years old.
I just did the math, Dominick, and if you're wondering, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
7 years, 5 times a day.
Oh shit.
That's 12,775
Okay.
masturbating sessions before you became a non-virgin.
So I had a lot of practice.
These are rough estimates, everybody. These are not hard facts.
When Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hours,
you were an expert masturbator before having sex.
Seriously, man, I was
It's
level.
It's kind of funny. It's also true and holy shit.
Hey, top 10,000 hand jobs I've ever received from this guy right here. Okay.
Let's get back to the feelings here.
Yeah. Well, but like think about the divergence of my public life. So 18 years old was the first time I actually had a girlfriend. She was 16, amazing. We had this like sweet relationship with each other where things were progressing quote unquote normally. And we didn't have sex with one another, but that was what was happening on the public front. And then privately, this next escalation was the internet came out. And I had America Online that connected me to this whole other world of other weirdos.
You got mail.
Yeah. Like that still can be like triggering.
That almost makes me horny hearing that.
Yes.
Because I know probably what's in that mail.
That's how pictures got sent, right? And so what was interesting was like I was isolated in my weirdness, quote unquote weirdness, all the way up until that point. And then this like online thing hits. And now I can talk to women who are all over the country, all over the world about this stuff that I had to keep by myself. And if you didn't grow up in that era, you have to understand that being online back then and talking to other people, you were a loser. You can't find romance in your real life. It was kind of all the rejects, quote unquote, that found you have to find your partner online.
Similar feelings when dating apps first came out.
Same.
It was like, oh, since you can't do it for real, you can go online.
Yeah, because you can't get it in real life. And so like there was another element of guilt and shame. I keep bringing guilt and shame in there because it's not something I was conscious of at the time, but those keep layering on. Those are telltale signs of a life lived in secrecy.
Dominick, at this point, whether it was the 2D porn that you found whether it was the white man can't jump video, whether it was now internet and pictures and talking with women. Did you have any collaborators or co-conspirators along with you on this ride?
That's an interesting question. Co-collaborators. You mean like in direct acts? Like, did I have a friend who I could talk to about this? No.
Yeah, like did it with, knew you were doing it, anything like that?
Nothing. No one. The only
this is pure. This is a true secret. Nobody knows this about
my own world, completely hidden from everyone else. And the only co-conspirators I started to find through America Online.
Okay.
Online. And now, like, I'm this like 16, 17, 18-year-old kid who's talking to women who are decades older than him. I found very early on that older women seem to enjoy my presence and company, and like at least virtual company.
In person or this is virtual?
First.
America Online.
Yeah,
okay.
Virtual. And I would have women who were like 20 years, 30 years older than me sharing their sexual stories with me as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old. And I loved that. Like, I felt special because they knew how old I was. And they would confide these secrets in me that was like someone who shouldn't be hearing them under the age of 18. That made me feel special. I would get off on those stories. They would tell me things and introduce me to worlds that I didn't know existed. So that became like really, really intoxicating for me. So I'd go online and also to know that there was also weirdos like me out there gave me a sense of community in this.
So you're not alone, at least virtually at this point.
Yeah.
But anybody you're doing it with is the flip side, the mirror side of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like too, there's an element of validation here. Where it's like, oh, like now it's not just me looking at something and doing something in secret, but there's somebody else, and even an older woman essentially giving stamp of approval saying, this is cool, I like this.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because like at the same time that I had this girl next door girlfriend who was really sweet, we had a relationship that was progressing the way that you would normally expect it. And then the women that I was talking to online who were like deeply sexual and telling me all of their sordid stories, there was, again, a bigger gap.
How did that make you feel? So these two Dominicks, the private and public Dominick, they're starting to grow more disparate, and maybe even the private one's even bigger. Upon reflection, how did that affect your relationship with your girlfriend?
Yeah, this is really interesting. The relationship I had with my girlfriend, there was genuine sentiment and feeling. There was also a lot of should. I should do this. I should.
Like a proper way to be a boyfriend in high school. Proper way to be a boyfriend,
yeah.
Okay.
But then the feelings I was getting in this other hidden world, the mystery, the titillation, the exhilaration, the fact that I felt like I was breaking some rules and that felt so good. And then like this questioning of, man, like, is this who I really am because I'm so drawn to it? Like the pull over here is so much more powerful than this pull over there where, you know, maybe there's some feeling for her, but like the gravity of that.
So who's really Dom? Right. Is it the private Dom or is it the public Dom?
Yeah. Like I didn't know. And there became this like big tug of war. But the one that was winning is this one that was in isolation, right? The isolated life. I'm going to fast forward through the next like decade and a half or 2 decades of my life, which was like this consistent elevation, escalation of behaviors. So talking to women online was no longer enough. I needed to go meet them.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
You just went next level.
I did. The first woman I met, I was 21 years old. She was 47. 26 years old.
Take me into that decision. This is where, again, I'm reflecting on my history. And I certainly was talking to women and finding out cool, sexy things and seeing photos. I also did have friends that I would tell about this, or they would sit next to me as we're chatting with women. So there is a little bit of a real world collaboration, a little bit different than your story.
Yeah.
Where I never took it was this next step that you're talking about was I need to go meet somebody. At that point, like, what was it? What was it where you were like feeling that you're like, I want to do this next thing? We go meet them in person.
One of the first things I just want to address is you talking about how you had that real world collaboration, like where you were talking with other friends openly about that. I think that is so critical to short-circuiting the isolation, guilt, and shame cycle or trajectory. You had these healthier moments, healthier relationship with masturbation, healthier relationship with other people. So you were able to create a different trajectory than I did. I thought I had to bring all this stuff inside by myself. So to answer your question, what caused that next escalation? I was talking online with these women for 3 years and I just got curious. What would it be like to meet this person? And I got tired of just masturbating. And at that point, I'd also had sex now. I'd had sex with 2 women in college. And it was like, okay, if I'm going to go to hell anyway, or I don't believe that
I already broke the barrier, so I may as well really go after it.
Exactly. And I think at that point, it was more like, I'm not going to go to hell. Like this religion thing at this point in time was like really questioning it.
And, and now what age is this that you're making this decision to go meet somebody in person?
21.
This is 21. Okay.
She was 47, 26 years older than me, like more than double my age. And she was a woman. She had experience, and she let me try all sorts of things that I'd never tried before. And the women I had been sleeping with, they were girls, like they were college girls, you know. And then this did you suggest meeting in person? Did she suggest meeting in person? How did that go down? I'm still fascinated by. I respect it actually. I think at 21 I was too scared to do something like this, so I respect the effort here, and I'm curious about it. Online, I could be really bold. In my real life, I was hesitant. I was gun shy. I was really sensitive to rejection. But online, I could just be like this. Bold. I could put myself out on the line. And so she was someone who was like, you're too young, but you're really cute. I like talking to you. And I was like, we need to meet. And she would say, no. And I could handle that rejection there.
Yeah. The rejection element in real life versus virtual life, totally different. It's just like another reason dating apps work well.
Yes, 100%. And so I was just persistent with her. And finally I got her to agree to just meet with me. I went to her place. She lived in Queens. I borrowed my family's car. They had no idea.
What was that road trip like from your house to, is it her place did you meet, or did you meet at a restaurant?
Her place.
Her place. What was that like?
It's a great question, man. It was like this flood of competing emotions. I think I drove the entire way with like a boner and also the fear
21-year-old boner.
A 21-year-old boner. Like those things are like there all the time. And also the fear of God, kind of like at the same point of, am I going to get caught? Is this wrong? But it feels so good. Like I got to make this happen. So it was just all of that.
There's this element of private Dominick, but private Dominick for the most part, at least at this point in your life, is virtual. And so now private Dominick is becoming real.
A little bit more public Dominick. Yeah. And like meeting her, it was an awesome first experience. Like she was great. I remember her answering the door in this dress, her legs like heels. It was amazing. And she it was, I don't know. You're
at a loss for words today. Still, you're never at a loss for words, and you're deep here.
I guess it was kind of like one of those moments that maybe a lot of younger men fantasize about. Like I had it. She welcomed me in. There was a little bit of hesitation on her part, but like we had this moment that allowed me to feel what it was like to be with an older woman, to explore with her. She showed me certain things around like, hey, here's my body. Here's how it works. Would you like to try this thing that you've heard about, like maybe anal sex or whatever? We didn't do it on that first time, but I saw her multiple times, and I could ask questions. There wasn't like game playing. There was just a command from her standpoint. So like I grew up a lot.
So now you've tasted something at a pretty young age that's pretty amazing. It's in real life, but it's still private. This is not something that everybody in Dom's ecosphere in your world knows about. It's still very private. I was embarrassed
by it too. Like if anyone were to find out that I was sleeping with a 47-year-old woman, they'd be like, what is the matter with you? And this like, again, this image of the well-behaved kid doing the things he's supposed to do, well-respected. Like, at college, I was like a fraternity president. I was one of the student government leaders, chair of orientation, all of these public-facing things that just does not jive with Dominick sleeping with a 47-year-old woman. Like,
so here's my question then. Now that it's in a real world, you've gained some real world knowledge at this point, and pretty good knowledge based on your description. How did that change public Dom or real world Dom?
How did that change the public me? I think what it did with the public me is that I started to feel this mounting pressure not to get discovered. Like
interesting.
This fear of like the public Dominick, this fear of
a little more risky now.
Am I going to get found out? What
were you dating somebody at this time?
I can't. Yeah, probably.
Because I'm curious at what that experience with an older woman brought into that type of relationship,
no. Like,
if any, or you kept them separate.
Yeah, I didn't have a girlfriend while I went, and so like at that point in time, like I kept things totally separate. So if I was sleeping with like an older woman in this casual way, I did not have a girlfriend. At that point in my life, I held values and integrity, morality, like you just don't cheat, like you just don't. And I never thought that I'd be someone who cheated ever. I deplored that, the betrayal aspect of it. It kind of shows how far I drifted from who I wanted to be as a human a few decades later, when I ended up breaking the heart of the first woman I ever loved.
Oh boy, spoiler alert.
Yeah. Well, maybe to kind of fast forward through that, I would say, the next 15 years or so, because I was 21 when I met this older woman, the next 12 or 13 years was just kind of like this continued escalation of meeting more and more women from online. And these women also had problems. Like they were also kind of numbing out their feelings. I didn't know that, right? But we just would naturally attract each other.
It sounds like they were taking something from you. You were taking something from them. Maybe both unaware of it happening, but that's what's going on.
Bingo.
There wasn't really a connection other than a taking.
Oh yeah, you nailed it, man. And they'd become increasingly more embarrassing to me. Like maybe they'd be less attractive than a woman that I would ever want to be seen with in public. That was just the reality, the real truth of some of the women I was sleeping with.
What, Dominick, at this point, now the curiosity is a little bit over because you've done it before, but you're continuing to do this behavior and, to your point, escalating. Mm-hmm. What is it giving you at this point?
That's $1 million question. Over the course of my life, all I was doing was numbing out my emotions because like my feelings from a very early age, I couldn't handle, I couldn't process. So the only way I would be able to release that was through masturbation. And then later on, it was like with women. When I suppressed my emotions or numbed them out for so long, it became hard to feel anything at all. Say in my workspace, like I would close a large deal that would pay me 6 figures of income and it would feel good, but it would feel nothing like the excitement and the thrill of getting in a car and driving to some weird place to have sex with someone that maybe I wasn't supposed to.
I see. So this is giving you a high almost at this point. Totally. Going to meet a virtual woman in real life that's maybe even new, that's a really big feeling for you.
Totally.
It feels, can you describe it? Is it powerful? Is it alluring? What is that high? I'm trying to understand.
The high? I mean, it's powerful. It's alluring. It's intoxicating. It's addicting. It's just magnetic. I mean, I can't overstate the importance of understanding the following. Like I had shrunken my emotional bandwidth. Like think about a football field, like goal line to goal line. Like there's 100 yards. There's a midfield at the 50-yard line. Let's just say 50-yard line is neutral. And then like one goal line is like positive emotion. One goal line is negative emotion. When I was a kid, the negative emotions were so deep and penetrating. They were awful. I couldn't handle it. Therefore, masturbation helped me to shrink it and numb that out. And as I numbed that out, like just think about my range of emotions was no longer goal line to goal line. It was basically like within a few feet of the center of midfield. And as I numb out emotions of negativity, I also numb out my ability to feel positive emotions. Big wins in my life or things that people would compliment me for, like I could hear them intellectually. I couldn't feel it on any feeling level because I numbed it out. But the one place that I could still feel was in this like seduction of women, was in the pursuit of, was in the secrecy of, and all of that was magical. And it actually, in a weird way, Brian, it was the only thing that made me feel alive.
So the word that, as you're describing the smaller yard lines of emotions in your life, it sounds like a dead life.
A dead life.
Without the emotions up, without the emotions down, and feeling, I think a lot of us, I've definitely gone through periods in my life where I feel like my life is dead.
Yes.
But you found in that moment a lifeline.
Yes.
Which was this alluring, powerful, sexual, creative, honest energy in you. And that was your lifeline at this point in your life.
Yeah. And I mean, I wish I could say that it was an honest energy. And
I didn't mean you being honest to yourself. I meant that the feelings of the sexual energy are real and honest, not necessarily what you did with them.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Fair point. Yeah. Right on.
So where are we at now? So you've met a bunch of women online. It sounds like you're now in a job. How old are you at this point?
Kind of the trajectory from when I graduated school, I was 22 years old. I went into a large financial services company, Prudential Financial, and I quickly had success there. Like I started off as like an internal sales support person, became a salesperson at a very young age. I was like the youngest person doing my job by 15 years in the company. Then I became a sales manager there for the eastern half of the country, responsible for $1 billion goal, and was the youngest like all the people who reported into me were older than I was. So like in my life, my public life, like it was rocking by other people's standards. And I guess by my own standards, by my own measures, like I thought that I was rocking too, but I just wasn't feeling much.
What I find really interesting about this, Dom, is that you're living this, as we stated earlier, this almost like dead emotional life, and you've got this sexual lifeline, but actually everything else in public Dom's life is going pretty damn good.
Right.
If that was me in that situation, I'd be like, this sex thing isn't a problem. It's something I can deal with. I can almost deserve it because I'm doing so good in public Dom life.
Exactly. It was kind of this, I would rationalize, look at all the good I'm doing over here and look how successful I am. There's no problem as long as I'm this successful. And if people look up to me and I'm having continued trajectory of upwards, then I can't have a problem. And yet at the same point in time, I was just like, something feels weird about this. I mean, escalating behaviors would be over the course of those next decade of my life between 21 or 22 and let's say 33, 34, I would constantly have a dozen women at any point in time that I could sex message or go on instant messenger and have these long fantasy driven conversations. Like, what would you do if we went out and, next weekend in Buffalo, because one person was in Buffalo.
And Dom, one more, just and I want to hear more about, because I think this is a really important part in terms of the sexting and how many people and everything else that is part of your sex life at this point, or even I would say connection life at this point. But one thing you mentioned earlier in the podcast was, even as a young kid, it was these sources of external validation that telling you were good and things you did well and everything else. And now as older Dominick, 24, 25 years old, you still have the sexual thing going on, but your definition of success is still external in some way, shape, or form, right? It's the 100%. Money coming in, it's the position I have, it's
just higher stakes, more sophisticated.
Right. Yeah. But it seems similar to that, and now you're getting what it sounds like some additional external validation in the sexual realm.
Yeah, it is. And I got better at learning how to get those things. So I became very well manicured. I knew how to dress to get the woman. I knew how to dress.
He does dress really well, everybody.
Yes,
he does.
Yeah. I do. Yeah. I'm going to own that. And I learned how to dress to get the woman. I learned how to speak to get the client. I learned how to be a chameleon, to be the kind of guy that people needed me to be in that moment. And it was exhausting, but it was but I needed that validation. And every moment, Brian, became this reckoning of, am I valued or not? If I closed the deal, I was a good salesperson. That was a reckoning on who I was as a professional. If I lost the deal, I'm a failure and I better close another one quickly. Otherwise, whatever. If a woman rejects me, then I'm not desirable. What the fuck? And so these were the things that I was constantly grappling with. And I was always on this edge of annihilation. Am I going to be valued or not?
Now you're still getting the fix through other means. Now it sounds like sexting. And talk to me a little bit about where you're at that point.
So I think what used to be on my computer with instant messaging, then when smartphones got smarter and, text messages became free, you used to have to pay for text messages, like the transition to free text messaging.
It's true.
Created this explosion of on a literal and figurative explosion for me, to
Dominick, why are there 65,000 text messages on our phone bill?
I'm not even kidding you, man. Sometimes I'm a data freak. There was this one time where I was starting to monitor my text messaging behavior. I forget, this was a few years ago. When I was in a powerful state where I was not sex messaging that much, I probably had 1,500 messages sent and received per month. When I was really at the height of my addiction, it would be 5,000 to 6,000 a month.
5x was the escalation.
It was big. It was a big escalation, and probably 3 to 4x escalation. And 60 to 70% of those messages, I even did the data on this, were for women. It was just this back and forth throughout the day. Anytime I felt bored or understimulated, in between meetings, on conference calls, people didn't know this. This was what I was rolling every day. I couldn't stop it. Or it's not that I couldn't stop it. It was just I didn't want to stop it. Now, I carried all of that into a relationship. All of that conditioning, all of that patterning, all of those other women, all of the modulating my pressures and anxieties, brought all of that into a relationship where at the age of 33 or 34, I finally found myself with a woman and in love for the first time. I never experienced love in a romantic sense up until that point because like I had these two separate worlds, right? I was constantly keeping women at a distance.
Dominick, how did she come into your world? Did she come into your world through public Dominick identity or private Dominick?
Public identity.
Okay.
And
so this is the equivalent of your high school girlfriend coming in through the public side of Dominick.
Correct. Like I'm glad you asked that question, because there's no way in hell that someone could enter through that private, isolated Dominick that I would ever put on a public stage.
Got it. So they could get your dick, but not your heart.
Yeah, you nailed it. So she came in this public place, and I started feeling things for her that I'd never felt before. Like there was this closeness, there was this love, there was over the course of, like, say, the first 3, 6, 7 months, like I loved spending time with her. We would read books together, we would eat together, our conversations were stimulating, our sex just kept getting better. Like when we finished having sex, instead of like wanting to be over and goodbye, like I wanted her closer to me. I never felt these things before. And I never felt sex get better. Anytime I'd had more sex with somebody, I got tired of it. And so this was like, whoa. And at the same time, I was still sex messaging other
Got
women.
it. That was the next question. So did all those other behaviors of private Dominick go away? Or did they continue while you were even in this loving relationship?
I didn't even look at sex messaging as being like wrong or bad. I'm not going to sleep with any of these women, but like sex messaging with them is not cheating because it's not physical. Like I put this really hard line of, if it's not a physical act, then I'm good.
So the question I have, Dom, is you're in this loving relationship. The sex is great. The communication is great. The lifestyle is great. Now you're not going to meet people in person anymore like you were.
Right.
What are you getting out of that private side of Dominick now?
I was still getting the thrill. I was still getting that sense of aliveness.
Even though everything in the relationship was good.
When I say everything in the relationship, it clearly wasn't. On a certain level, there was a lot of great things that were happening. The reason why I would go to that other place, that darker place, is because it was just so deeply entrenched. This was like 2 decades of behavior at this point, right? And it was like muscle memory. And if I'd be, say, sitting at home on my couch on a Sunday night, my girlfriend, she's at her place, I'm at my own place, and I'm getting the Sunday scaries, like I would just hop on my phone, watching TV and sex message like 6 or 7 other women.
What it sounds like is like this is the status quo. It's almost ingrained behavior at this point. Yeah. And if a feeling came up, girlfriend's not around, then do the same thing you'd always do.
Yep.
You started masturbating at the age of whatever it was, 8 or 9 years old.
I started like around 13, 14.
Okay,
I found
13,
Playboy
14.
at 8. Yep.
Playboy was 8, no masturbating. By the way, congrats, no masturbating between 8 and 14
I know.
with Playboy. That's amazing. Yeah. But okay, started masturbating at 14, and now let's say you're 34 years old.
Yep.
20 years of this ingrained behavior, It's almost automatic.
There's
automatic. No consciousness to it.
Stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. Like there was no space in between it. So I didn't even really like question it. There was no room for that. One of the key characteristics of addiction is like this ability to rationalize away your behavior, to minimize the bullshit, to not call yourself on your own shit. So I could rationalize, oh yeah, I'm just sex messaging with the other women. It's, it's no harm. I'm not acting on it. It's not creating a divide in my relationship. I'm not cheating. I would minimize the impact on how present or focused or how much energy I could have for my girlfriend. It would minimize it, right? I would just rationalize it away. But then as my relationship got deeper with my girlfriend, she became closer. I started to feel backed into a corner because the closer she would come, the more she could start to see that like I wasn't who I projected myself to be. She could start to sense that there was like this 2 worlds because she couldn't get past this facade of mine.
So she's living and came in through public Dominick. Mm-hmm. But now since you're spending so much time together, she's starting to see, not knowing what it is, but there's some sort of private Dominick.
Yeah.
At this point, Dominick, what are your feelings about public and private Dominick at this point? Is there any element of, I want to do away with this, or I want to just tell her everything? Where are you at this point?
Survival mode. Survival mode is don't get found out.
Don't get caught.
And by the way, like I didn't even have the awareness of like public and private Dominick. Like I couldn't have even articulated that to you. It was just like, there's this stuff over here. Don't get found out for it.
This is still bad. This is still the Playboy in the basement.
Yeah. Playboy, like bad, perverted, and you're unlovable. If anyone were to find out the entire you, they wouldn't love you. You'd be ostracized completely. I could never show my full self to the world because I would be a reject.
This needs to stay a secret forever. And because I'm not going to get caught, I can keep doing it. Correct. Because it's going to be a secret forever. Nobody else needs to know.
Correct. And I felt trapped, and it was scary, man. What happens, like in that situation where I'm feeling trapped or cornered or potentially about to be figured out, emotions come up. Feelings come up. What do I do when my feelings or emotions come up?
Oh, I know the answer to this. Oh boy.
You know.
Oh, there are lots of masturbation and other sex stuff, Dominic.
That's exactly where I went. And guess what happened? I started escalating. And for the first time in my life, I found myself cheating on not just anyone, but the one woman who had brought love into my life. Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.